What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 tips for Steelrising, which is releasing in full a little later today. However, it has been available via a closed beta for the past couple of weeks. So I decided it would be fun to compile some tips for the release of this game for the people jumping into it today, in case they needed a little bit of help. As, if you're unaware, this game is a Souls-like. Though, to be fair, if you're looking for tips and you bought that game today, I kind of hope you already knew that. But that said, before we go any farther, understand that this game does have an assist mode, which will change a lot of variables and make it easier for you. Now, this will disable things like achievements, etc., but for most people who don't care about that kind of thing, assist mode is a great way to play the game and get some help through the more tedious parts for people unfamiliar with these types of games. However, if you want to play the game in its full normal mode, these tips should very much help you out. And we're going to kick this off with my personal favorite, and that is that grenades are incredibly useful. Throughout the game, you will have throwable items, which are, of course, grenades. But these grenades, while dealing a ton of damage just by themselves, also apply an elemental effect. In this particular game, there are a few elemental effects that, when applied in mass, or you apply enough of it, will then apply an effect. I find freezing to usually be the single most useful, but there's also things like burning and shocked. Freeze does exactly that. It freezes the enemy in place for a time. Now, this is especially useful because bosses are not really immune to these things, which means you can spam grenades, which do a ton of damage by themselves, while also, say, then freezing a boss after just lobbing a few grenades at it. And now you can just spam the thing with attacks until it gets back up. And it's a great way to kind of deal with the situation. And in many cases, in my experience with the game, it's been relatively easy to kind of just grind through most bosses, if nothing else, by just finding and buying grenades from the shop. But that moves us to our second tip, and this is that block and parry in this game are not a given. They are actually tied to weapons. This is something I did not immediately realize, so I thought it would be great to add in here. So Aegis, your robot here, can equip various types of weapons, and these weapons sort of dictate your play style. For instance, all of these weapons have a special attack, and in some cases, that special attack is your block or parry, meaning that if you want to take advantage of those things, you're going to have to play the game in a certain way with those particular types of weapons. For everyone else, there are things like the dodge mechanic, of course. So just understand, block and parry are tied to certain weapon types, and each weapon will tell you what special attack it has, and that's where you get your block and parry from. Now, for our third tip, a lot of weaker non-boss enemies can just be completely locked down with heavy attacks. Oftentimes, if you can get the first attack in, you can just spam heavy attacks because the time in between the enemy getting hit and then recovering is so great that you can just do another heavy attack. And for weaker enemies, this is usually enough to just knock them down completely and kill them outright. In some instances, they might get up when they have just a little bit of health left, or they themselves might try to actually block you. But this simple thing is something I found to be incredibly effective for the smaller, weaker enemies. Doesn't really work on bigger enemies, and obviously bosses not so much, but it's an easy way to clear a lot of the riffraff, if you will. Now, number 4 might seem exceedingly obvious, but it's not something the game tells you about, and moreover, they did a really good job of blending them into the scenery, so it might not even occur to people that you can. While you can't attack and destroy most of the environment, you can actually attack barrels. Now, the barrels themselves don't really stand out in any way. Again, they feel very tied to the scenery. However, you can break all of them, and you should do so because oftentimes you will find hidden items inside, which will give you tons of resources like the grenades I mentioned earlier, for instance, or consumable items that will give you more of your currency and XP, which is a great way to level up faster. And again, while it might seem obvious, break every barrel you see. There is so much hidden stuff you'll find in those barrels. And if you actually do this, you can be kind of swimming in grenades as well as extra XP relatively quickly, as long as you're seeking them out and actually breaking them open. And last but not least, and that is sneak attacks. But not just sneak attacks, we're going to talk about how the levels are designed a little bit here. So there is a sort of sneak attack tutorial that the game tells you about. Basically, enemies in this game work off line of sight. If you can sneak up behind them, they won't see you, but if you're in their line of sight and you're close enough, they will come after you. However, if you can come up behind an enemy and lock onto them, your character will enter a sort of crouch mode, at which point you will sneak up until the cursor on that enemy turns red, and then once you attack at this point, it will execute a sneak attack, which does a bunch more than normal damage. For smaller, lower level enemies, this will just kill them outright usually, and for some enemies, it will just take most of their health away, and then you hit them a couple times and they're dead. However, a couple more things I want to talk about with this particular thing is the actual level design of the world. So most enemies will usually have some sort of path around them or a way to sneak up behind them. For instance, a lot of them walk a set path, and if you wait around a corner, you can sneak up behind them and sneak attack them. Or in some cases, you might find a shortcut that then leads you around and behind an enemy, which can make your life a lot easier. Now, it's not available in every scenario, but another thing I want to mention here is that a lot of times the enemies themselves are sort of leashed to an area, meaning if you get so far away, they will often run back to where they were. However, they don't really recover health here, so it is possible to just sneak attack something big, run away, wait for it to leash, go back and do it again and kill it, which again is a great way to get rid of the stronger but still not boss enemies. As for bosses, it's pretty much just a straight up fight, and grenades are usually the easiest way I've found to get by those guys. But there you guys go, 5 tips for Steelrising, which is launching a little bit later today from the time of this video, probably at least 4 or 5 hours. But nonetheless, I certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If these tips wind up helping you out, I would love to hear about it down in the comments section below, but let me know what you think either way. And regardless of all that, truly just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.